Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us to another of our LAPADA leaders, which we started earlier in lockdown 1, and here we find ourselves in lockdown 3. And I am delighted that we're going to talk to two very well-known faces to many of you today about restoration. So what I also want to let you know, for those of you who haven't joined one of these before, at the bottom you'll see that there is a Q&A box and there's also a chat box. In the chat field we will be posting links to both projects and books and various things that William and Philip have shared with us as resources, so do have a look at that. There's also a Q&A box where please do post any questions. We will address as many of those as we can at the end, but also if there's something particularly relevant in the conversation, we might ad-lib a bit and bring it in earlier, but there will be a time for some Q&As at the end. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our speakers today, who are both homeowners and they have wrestled with the challenges of restoring the houses that they now call their homes. So we will hear quite a little bit more about that in a moment. So Philip Mould, who is also a LAPADA member, I'm delighted to say, is an international art dealer and has been based in London's Mayfair for the last 35 years. He specialises in 500 years of British art and also spotting those rare and sometimes overlooked masterpieces that we know as sleepers, and has made some great discoveries along the way. And you can read about some of these in his books, In Search of Lost Old Masters and Sleuth, which is an amazing quest for lost art treasures, and both of them read a little bit like art thrillers. They really are thoroughly good reads. Philip is also known to many of you for his BBC One programme, They Call Fortune, and well, even better, I think recently, he's kept us entertained and has sated our hunger for art by writing and presenting 30 short programmes, Art in Isolation, and we will post the link to those with his son. And they have been, thank you so much for doing that for us, because we've all been thirsting to see a little bit more art in lockdown, and you have helped quench that thirst. And then on to William Cash, who is an award-winning editor and also author and self-confessed addict of Restore a Wreck. And we will be hearing more about Upton Cressett Hall in Shropshire and his labour of love there. But I first came across William Cash as editor of Spears magazine. He is an award-winning editor for that. He also now has the Politico magazine, The Mace, and also the Westminster Index. So if we want a who's who and a romp through the politics of today, then have a look, and we can also post links to that in the chat. So before we get on to the sort of questions and learn a bit more, Philip, would you like to give us a little sort of introduction to why you're with us today?
Well, hello, everybody. So my name is Philip, and I'm an old house owner, and I've had one for 20 years now, and it has been a sort of thrilling and now indivisible part of my life. I discovered it as a result of a property searcher around about, actually it was 21 years ago now, and have grown up with it. And it has become really, particularly in lockdown, a beloved friend, and all sorts of aspects of this place, which was built in 1627, are now, I feel, part of me. So I'm looking forward to discussing some of the aspects of it.
Thank you, Philip. And William, tell us a little bit about your journey.
Thank you. Well, I'm William, and I have been, or my family have been living at Upton Cressett for 50 years now. My father was a lawyer in London and decided in 1970 to become a member of SPAB, which is the Society of Protection of Ancient Buildings. And in the SPAB register of historic buildings at risk, he saw a very unlikely looking ad, which basically said, extremely wrecked manor house needs great amount of love and attention, going cheap. That was the gist of it. And on I think it was a sort of Sunday afternoon, we piled into a Citroen Safari. We lived in North London, and we drove up, took about 4 hours, and we came across this. I still remember it. I was about 4 or 5 at the time, and the house was, we expected just to drive by and have a looky-loo look. But actually the doors had been removed by vandals. And the whole place was something like out of a Daphne du Maurier novel, completely uninhabited, ruined. In fact, the only inhabitants were chickens and pigs, and the farmer had actually moved out because it was so inhospitable. And my parents fell in love with it. And they embarked on a labor of love themselves. For about 2 years, we were sort of camping out. And then after, cut to sort of 25 years later, after I'd had 2 rather painful divorces and lived in America, I decided to retreat from the world, put the drawbridge up, and devote 2 or 3 years of my life to sort of recreating a sort of Arcadia. My book tells the story of how I restored the house as a way to restore myself. So it's very much an emotional journey, as well as a journey in learning about how to blend the perfect lime mortar and other techniques.
Thank you. And it's a great read. I'm afraid I haven't got all the way through it yet, because it came much later than it said on the Amazon delivery. So I'm only halfway through, but it really is a labor of love in many, or affairs of the heart in many ways. So Philip, on to you. So it's a slightly different journey for you and slightly more recent, but why did you decide to buy this house? And when did your sort of project for restoration begin?
Okay, so although originally in life I'm from Liverpool, as you can tell by my accent, I moved to London and began to feel very itchy about 25 years ago, in my sort of 40s, and desperately wanted somewhere. I wanted some oxygen. I wanted greens, and my wife had seen an article about a lovely ancient house that was owned by the authoress Penelope Lively. And she said, wouldn't it be wonderful if one day we know that house? I can see you're responding as if you've read one of her books.
I love her, yeah.
well, so we had something tangible in prospect here, her house, that we actually briefly went to have a look at. And it became embedded. And about 5 years later, when we decided in earnest to go and find somewhere, we employed a couple of property finders who came to our house and sat down and said, could you please describe the type of house you're looking for? You know, and we sort of tried to grasp adjectives out of the air. And in the end, my wife said, look, can I just show you a photograph of the perfect house, the ideal little miniature manor house in a field? And she presented it to them. They looked at each other and said, you won't believe this, Mrs. Mould, but it's coming up on the market in about 3 weeks' time. And we ended up in quite a protracted sort of a bidding war, but we ended up with it. And so unlike William, who was partly to the manor born, we very much felt that this was a sort of need in our life, a bit like sort of trying to buy a dog or something like that. And incidentally, a whippet has joined me since. So I choose the comparison carefully. It has been the most marvelous amplification to the joy of life.
And I suppose as well, unlike William, you had to accommodate an awful lot of art, whereas I think we'll probably hear a little bit about William's journey to find some of the art and antiques to, you know, return to Upton Cressett. But do you want to show us a few images, Philip, so we know what the manor house in the field is, or would you like to?
Okay. So this is it about 3 weeks ago in the winter cold, and one thing, of course, that, you know, all of you lounge lizards in London cozily sitting in front of radiators, you've got to know, unless you are an old house owner, that cold, that drafts are one of the biggest parts of your life. In fact, you need to befriend them. That was a particularly cold moment. But you'll see that this is a miniature manor house. Now, by manor house, I mean it goes back to the Domesday Book. I'll come back to that later on, because we certainly didn't know that then, as opposed to a farmhouse. So what do I mean by that? It's quite sort of pretentious in a way, with that central gable. It's got 4 floors. It's a sort of look at me house, even though it's rather diminutive, and yet it's only got 4 bedrooms. So it's small, extrovert, and rather perfectly formed. And one of the things that drew me to it was, although the windows have slightly slipped and changed, and the front door has moved, and I suspect the dormers were put in the 18th century, what you're looking at here is an extraordinarily rare survival, and that is an early 17th century yeoman manor house, built, in fact, we know because we found the date hidden behind the fridge, carved by one of the builders in 1627. And for all sorts of reasons to do with history, to do with poverty, to do with chance, it's just managed to hang on in there and remain largely looking as it is now. And if you just go to the photograph of its surroundings, you see that it actually still has its curtilage. And if you look to the left-hand side of the photograph, you can see a dovecote. And if you look just to the right of the house itself, you'll see that there's a barn, a couple of barns. And we have about 15 acres around, which I adore. They're my playground for meadows. And we recently introduced, in fact, just go back to that last one, if you would, with the meadow. We recently introduced, if you look at the right-hand corner, do you see that lump of stone? It's actually geologically shaped. It was found in an old field. It's not an artifact, to be pleased to know, but it's a 5-ton piece of granite that we just added to the grounds. We felt it was the only type of work of art that could work there. Anyway, so that's my dream. That's our house. And I'll happily tell you more about it later. But it's nothing compared to the grandeur of Williams.
So let's move on to the historic grandeur of Williams House. Gillian, do you want to share Williams' slides? Brilliant. Here we go. And I think we have a confession to make. When we started marketing it, we were only using the coach house. It was a small sliver of the home itself.
Well, yeah, we did have. Someone told me an amusing story about that the other day, which was that my father has always been a little nervous about when the sort of news cameras come up on a, if there's some sort of breaking news story relating to Brexit or something.
Your father being the major MP,
Sir Bill Cash. And I remember one instance when the sort of trucks from Sky News arrived or something, and my father said, "Gosh, I really don't want to be, photographed, in front of the house. So why don't we do it in front of the gatehouse?" And they did the interview in front of the gatehouse. And anyway, yeah, people assumed that was actually Upton Cressett Hall, but it actually wasn't. It was just a thing. But actually, in all fairness, what Philip said, I think also about his house applies to Upton Cressett. You use the word grand, but actually we don't think of it like that at all, because in fact it's tucked away. It doesn't have a kind of stately drive. And houses in the early Middle Ages and Elizabethan era, especially this time, this is essentially a manor house, which was, admittedly, the chimneys, were stand out, but it's a house that was very much used. It was a centre of the community, but it wasn't actually built in the sort of stately style that became so prominent. And I think that's one of the things that we love about living here. It does look a bit grandiose, but I can assure you, if you come here, you'll agree that actually, it has a certain homeliness about it. I just want to pick up on one or two points about what Philip said. I think the first thing that always people say when you sort of take on a house like this is, and you leave London and you don't kind of know quite what to expect, a bit like my parents in 1970s, people will say you're totally mad to take on such a project. A good example of that is John Challis, better known as Boycie in Only Fools and Horses. And he's written a fantastic book about the restoration of Wigmore Abbey, which is near Ludlow. And, you know, it's so often the case with restore-a-wreck romantics like myself and Philip, that actually, you know, one finds oneself following some sort of divine providence. I mean, that story that Philip said, it just happens so often. In Boyce's house at Wigmore Abbey, it turned out that his wife's coat of arms were carved above the staircase. Now, the truth is that I'm afraid this kind of passion and romance often leads to complete disaster. And I'm happy to talk about it a bit later, but there is one of the things that we have in the house, which is quite extraordinary, is we have this ornamental 17th century plasterwork, which is replicated in 4 or 5 other houses around Shropshire, including Morville Hall, but most notably Buildwas Abbey, which is the abbot's house. And about 2 years ago, about 3 or 4 years ago, I found out that it was coming on the market, this abbot's house. And I lived and was very happily living in Upton Cressett with Laura and everything. And I found it came on the market, and in some irrational sense, I just felt that the emotional journey of Upton Cressett wouldn't be complete until we'd actually expanded and acquired the abbot's house, which actually is one of the most flooded sites in England. It would have cost millions to restore, but something just grabbed me. And fortunately, I just about saved myself from ruination by not acquiring it as a sort of event house to do weddings and things. But it's just so extraordinary that the pull that these houses have. In my book, I very much equate it to having an affair. It really is like a romantic relationship. And I felt that with Buildwas Abbey, and in my book, I describe it as the Buildwas affair. It was like, you know, an indiscretion. I felt it, but you know, as I say.
So can I take you from your indiscretion to the amazing? I think is that a bedroom at the bottom.
Yeah,
of this.
That's a really great. That's a lovely room. That is in the gatehouse.
Yeah.
And that is known as the Prince Rupert Suite.
So tell us about Prince Rupert's relationship to the house then. Because I think also Philip has helped you with that.
That's right, absolutely. So the Prince Rupert Suite is actually quite an interesting story. He stayed not actually, I have to confess, in that very bedroom. Because this bedroom, what's interesting about the house is how the gatehouse is so disproportionately tall. It's really a prospect tower, and that room there was a banqueting house. So the gatehouse is really a banqueting house. And when Margaret Thatcher came to stay in 1994, there's a lot of in people who have historic houses often revel in the people who have stayed in the house before. And it's true to say sometimes it's not entirely, there's ambiguity about whether a historic figure stayed in the house. And we know that Prince Rupert is alleged to have stayed there because it's in the history books, but we don't know for certain. So when Margaret Thatcher stayed, we knew for certain that she'd stayed in the room downstairs. So we called it the Thatcher Suite. And then we decided we had to kick Prince Rupert upstairs into the Prince Rupert bedroom, which is our honeymoon suite. And actually, my wife, we've been locked up here for several months. And just only last weekend, it is actually a holiday let. We rented out for honeymoon couples. And only last weekend, we took our children and Laura, who'd never stayed there, for a weekend in the gatehouse. So we road tested it in the Prince Rupert bedroom.
I love that, a staycation in And Philip, did you? I'm sort of, is that Prince Rupert in the background there? Or not in the dining room? No.
Yeah, I can move round.
Yeah, we've got.
There we are. We can see it. I think there. Can you see that?
the both of you have quite a long-standing relationship, and have you supported each other in these projects?
That's Prince Rupert there, yeah.
Philip,
can you actually hear me?
Yeah, I can now. I couldn't for a moment, but I can now.
Good. Can you actually see my face at all, by the way?
Yes.
Not that you need to.
Yeah, no, we do need to, and we can see it.
Okay, well, I can't see yours, but that doesn't matter.
Oh.
So, you know, such the excitements of zooming in lockdown.
Yeah.
So yes, William and I, we go back a long way. William is a dear friend, and a ubiquitous sight at London drinks parties, which is how I sort of really cut my teeth on William. So when he said he was looking for works of art for his house, well, being a second-hand picture dealer, I naturally said, well, perhaps I can help. And the wonderful thing about Upton Cressett is that it is a sort of encyclopedia of history. Almost anyone who was anyone from the sort of 1500s onwards seems to have stayed there or brushed up against it, including the glamorous royalist cavalry commander, Prince Rupert of the Rhine. And so I was able to find Prince Rupert and sell it to William for a very friendly price. He's put it up on his walls. And I remember coming for the sort of the baptism party, sort of Prince Rupert's coming out at Cressett. And it was great. And it sort of reminds me actually of this very important thing about living in an old house, which is trying to add things that suit the character of the house. Now, in the case of Upton Cressett, of course, you've got such great historical personages that you can choose from a galaxy of stars. You know, the princes in the Tower and Charles I and what have you. With our house, when we arrived, we didn't know who lived there before 1950. And with the help of a local historian, we gradually got back further and further. And it was really thrilling. Every weekend we'd come up, because yes, we were, and sort of still are, except for lockdown weekenders. What would happen is we would inch deeper into history. And now we know who lived there every day back to about 1563. And the way that the local historian who helped us do this, the way that she discovered that was using field names and the transactions that were associated with them. She started in the 1950s with Carter Moss, because the house was but pulled down, and Carter lived with his cows, I gather, and some horses in the lower part of the house. But it was much more interesting, well, not much more interesting, because I think Carter Moss was the compelling figure, always finding his horseshoes. But there were sort of all sorts of people who were associated with the Civil War and Banbury and the greater story of history, the further back we went. And the high point for me was, I don't know whether you could find a photograph of this, but we were in a sale at Sotheby's, and there on the wall, this sort of face seemed to be beckoning me. And as I got closer, one could see that it was the rather sort of rich, mellifluous strokes of an artist called Robert Walker, who was the Republican painter. He was the sort of the Van Dyck answer to showing Roundheads. Although ironically, in this case, this was a royalist, because it was none other than a portrait of Sir William Cope, who lived in the house, who actually partly built it. And so goodness knows how it ended up there. But we were able to buy the painting, a bit like William with Upton Cressett and Prince Rupert. This was not a major figure. He was a colonel in the Civil War on the royalist side, painted by this Republican painter, rather oddly. But now it's our little portal to history. We have it on the wall, and for those who are interested, we can travel through its circular dimensions 300 years back to the history of the house. And pictures like this are like sort of audio visuals for a house. And it's been one of the many paintings that I've been able to talk about in lockdown with my online series, Art in Isolation.
And one of the questions that has already popped up is whether Duck End is listed. And I know that both of you, and I think with William, with Upton Cressett, it's sort of changed in listing. So it'd be quite interesting to have a conversation around the sort of how the listing is done in Britain, and whether that's a sort of a good or a bad thing, if you like, whether that's challenging going with the graded listings or not. So just, I know you've got quite a lot to say on that, William. So starting with Philip, is Duck, was it listed and to what
yes,
level?
It is, and it's grade 2, but in fact it should be higher because of its the integrity of its remains, and I gather the local sort of officials see it as such. But fortunately, we've actually managed to avoid it getting to that 2-star point. So it does allow a certain amount of flexibility that perhaps we wouldn't be allowed normally, although they do take a great interest in it. But it's this listing thing, which goes back to the 50s and 60s, of course, has been the savior of the fabric of our nation's architectural history. But as I think William will tell us, it has some serious challenges.
Yes, tell us about your, William, because I know you've recategorized it as well, I think. Or had it
yes, well,
regraded.
I mean, people often say that you're sort of one of the problems with living in a historic house is that you're always up against planners, and that in fact you can never change anything. And in fact, my own experience is somewhat different. I had a situation where about 10 years ago, Upton Cressett, which is this kind of jewel set in the landscape of P.G. Woodhouse's Paradise of England, as he describes it in the Blandings novels. And of course, P.G. Woodhouse was brought up in Bridgnorth and used to cycle around the lanes just round where we are. Unfortunately, some rather greedy local farmers wanted to turn the horizon around Upton Cressett into what's known as an industrial landscape. Let's just leave it like that. But the point being is that we decided we had to defend Upton Cressett. And one of the pieces of advice I was given, I described the story about how we sort of saved Upton Cressett from desecration, was to someone said, well, you really should apply to get Upton Cressett upgraded to grade 1. And so we set about a kind of campaign with English Heritage. And in fact, they were very open. And what actually had happened in the 1950s, as Philip just alluded to, the listing system was put together in a very sort of ramshackle way. It came out of the war when buildings in London were bombed, and they had to decide quickly which ones were worth saving. And it then became a nationwide survey. But in regards to Upton Cressett, I'm sure someone just arrived on a bicycle, like John Betjeman and John Piper did in 1938, and took one look at it and saw the pigs and decided that, it was a ruin. And I was absolutely, I will never forget to this day when I went to the planning meeting to decide the sort of fate of Upton Cressett. And the developer who wanted to put these industrial monstrosities next to the house had actually used the 1950s listing in which it said that Upton Cressett was an uninhabited ruin. And it had not been updated since 1953. And the same applied to the church. So we now have 3 grade 1 listed buildings and 3 scheduled ancient monuments. And we absolutely adore sharing it all with the public. And, we really enjoy the fact that actually we can share the heritage, share the story. And I'm exactly with Philip in believing that the buildings of England tell the story of England. And one really is stepping into history at Upton Cressett, as Philip alluded to. And I mean, just in a very sort of potted history, but we're very lucky to have Adam Dant, who some of you may know because he won the Sherwood Prize and is a wonderful artist who did the murals here. But he has done a wonderful painting here called Upton Cressett, Times Present and Times Past, which deals with all the historical figures who've stayed here. And I suppose the beginning, yes, this is some of his work here, absolutely working. I think my favorite story really, and if you can see behind me, you'll see I've got a fire going. In April 1483, on St. George's Day, the young king, Edward V, set off for the Tower of London, where obviously he met a grisly fate, being the princes in the Tower. And we are almost certain that the royal party crossed the River Severn at Bridgnorth on the way to London, and stayed at Upton Cressett. So this very fireplace, which you can see behind me, is probably where young King Edward V warmed his hands on a freezing, probably April. And this sense of history is something that I think, is one of the great perks and lovely things about living in the historic houses. I mean, obviously people talk about ghosts and stuff. I don't know whether Philip's got any ghost stories related to his house, but in a way, it's, I mean, Adam Dan always says that, even when he goes around sort of painting places where the Globe used to be, which is now like, NCP car park or something. But the point being is that historical figures and buildings kind of live on, even when they've been destroyed. And I think that that's what makes living in a historic house so wonderful. You get this communion with history.
So Adam Dan, love his work, and he actually also very kindly did one on Berkeley Square in LAPADA Fair, and I think one of my colleagues is in the picture, as well as some more renowned historical figures. So fantastic. But just going back to the practicalities, and I think I'll start with you, Philip. Once you've, both of you have these wonderful projects. They've both been, homed animals at some point. And also, I think the dreaded Formica probably crept in at other points. So how do you assemble your kind of crack team to strip it back to the bare bones and build it again? And starting with you, Philip, what's your sort of key team that you need to get around you to begin one of these restore or wreck projects?
Well, we were very lucky because the house, as I think I mentioned, nearly fell down in the 50s. It was about to be pulled down, in fact. But a loving couple ahead of their time decided to start restoring it. And so we came to a house 20 years ago that was largely intact, didn't need any structural changes of any great significance. What it did, though, need was the reversal of all of this 60s, 70s and 80s sort of plastic and formica and wiring, and there were a few blocked in windows. And I think probably the closest analogy, which will probably mean something to some of the viewers today, would be an overpainted picture, a picture that doesn't need structural restoration or intervention, but has just been covered with reversible overpaint. And it was the most sort of thrilling process, using local builders in this instance, just simply to drag everything out of the house, to pull down the things that we now consider to be eyesores. Although probably actually now they might be retro and rather curious and lovely. But you know how it is. And so that was, I didn't need lots of clever people around, although I did subsequently use Sims, the builders, who they're no longer around, but they were a 150, 200-year-old building company who had a lot of experience with the Oxford colleges, and they did some important stonework. But what's happened is over the last 20 years, we've gradually done things to the house or around. We've restored a barn. We've done so much to the fields in a process of engendering wildflowers through meadow making, which many people will be familiar now with the wilding culture or the rewilding culture. But I'm president of a thing called Plant Life, which is the wild plant conservation charity. And what I've tried to do is, in the fields around, is bring back some of that continuity and history that nature can offer. Wildflowers are the same as they were 2,000 years ago in many instances. And so getting back the history of the curtilage, getting the diversity back, getting the wildlife back, has involved specialists and assistants. But it's just sort of one of the many sort of subtle things that we have been doing over 20 years. But unlike Upton Cressett, which to William's poor parents must have been such a sort of chilling challenge to begin with, we had a house that was delivered. It just needed to have its the sort of the unnecessary and eyesore accretia removed.
And so to William, so I mean, I know, having also read the book, we're talking phases, which is a nice way of sort of talking about budgetary requirements for some of these phases. But what was the sort of the team you needed to assemble, and do you find, because it's quite local, and you were talking about the sort of houses used a particular plaster work, is it also, are you needing to use local artisans quite a lot for Upton Cressett?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that's one of the great, one of the most satisfying aspects of doing the work, is that, of course, in the Elizabethan era, they would only have used sort of local chimney makers, local plasterers, local traveling plasterers, I should say, because they did all these other houses. And one of the great things has been, actually, Shropshire has a great tradition of sort of artisans. And my wife, Laura, is a milliner, as some people might know, Laura Cathcart Millinery, and we have a working millinery studio in the grounds as well. So it's very much a kind of celebration of kind of artisanship. And I have a fantastic wood carver called Andrew Pearson, who really is, the kind of Grinling Gibbons of Britain. And he lives in Ludlow, and he has done some carvings. And one of the tragic things about the house, when my parents first came here in 1970, is when they first walked in, they found that a lot of the original paneling had been ripped out by vandals. And the house had a particularly wonderful dragon frieze, which we do have photographs of, because it was photographed by I think it's called the National Commission of Heritage. And I've actually employed Andrew Pearson to recreate this dragon frieze in certain parts of the house, and that's been enormously satisfying. And in fact, above our bed, there is the initials of I believe it was Richard Cressett, were carved there with his wife. And I've even gone so far as to get Andrew to recreate that in terms of myself. So we've sort of exactly what Philip said. There's a real sense of continuing the kind of artisan tradition. And I must just add one thing, which is that in terms of when my parents first came here in 1970, it has to be said, and it's in the book, the anecdote, when I was talking to my father about the renovation, he said, "You do know that we didn't dare tell our respective parents for 2 years that we'd actually taken on Upton Cressett in 1970. They kept it a secret because they thought that, it was a form of madness." But anyway, the reality is that, Upton Cressett's always been what I call a community hub. We now have a wonderful literary festival, which we hope to get going again. We have a writer's retreat here. And, that's exactly what Elizabethan medieval manor houses were. They were the center of the local community. And I really hope that, we are able to bring people back to the heritage and enjoy the woods, which we're renovating at the moment, exactly as Philip is doing with his wonderful meadows.
And actually, just thinking, because I can see where time is marching on, and we do have quite a lot of questions coming through, but just thinking about the future, and particularly, I suppose, in COVID times, and maybe beyond your own home. So to you, Philip, first, just the sort of perils of keeping these houses going. But do you think, is there a danger of some houses that have been open to the public actually not opening again, having gone through a year and a half of this? What are we looking at for the sort of future of historic houses?
It's a grindingly perilous time, I think, for a lot of houses open to the public. It's just the idea of being able to survive after being knocked sideways by almost a year of no income. And although I'm sure, we'll all embrace them again, and the public will want to go in their torrents, how do you overcome this sort of fiscal malnutrition that they're suffering from? And I think museums are in the same category, and of course so are restaurants. So I think we need to be mindful that the map may slightly change of some of the great houses of Britain.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me, and just to follow on, and maybe William as well, you can add to this, but although I am very worried about the future of many of these homes, one of the things that I think will be quite interesting is we're less city and London focused. So actually, hopefully, some of the local ecosystem will help bolster up some of our historic houses in terms of visiting gardens and spaces, I hope. But William, what are your thoughts on?
Well, I just want
next?
to say, I mean, I think it's a fascinating subject. I read the other day that the National Trust are now sort of turning more of their properties into holiday lets. And I think there's something very interesting going on. I mean, when I was brought up in the 70s, I'm sure the same with Philip, in the car was always Hudson's Heritage Guide to Gardens and Historic Houses. And the reality is that people do love to come to these houses. But what's changed, and it's fascinating because I've got a sort of collection of brochures of historic houses, which I've collected over 20 years, is that in the old days, you used to open them up and it would be about the furniture and about the art. Not that there's anything wrong with that, Philip, but nowadays it's so much more about the family, about the landscape. And in fact, when people are coming to houses, and this is what we're doing at Upton Cressett now, it's not so much they want us to study the furniture or look at the paintings. They want a day out. And that's why, we, for example, are turning our wood into a woodland heritage trail. And I think that this is the where things are changing. People are desperate to get out of their houses. They want to be in a historic landscape. They want to be in a kind of a beautiful setting. And thanks to Norman Hudson, frankly, in the 1970s, it made that period a kind of a golden age where people could actually also acquire these restorer wrecks because they weren't particularly expensive. And I don't actually think they're particularly expensive today because only a certain type of mad person takes them on, in particular ecclesiastical properties. I mean, a great friend of mine has just bought the Archbishop, a friend of mine has just bought the Archbishop's house in Hereford for the price of a basement flat in Fulham. But this is a great, wonderful former archdeacon's house, I should say, with a sort of great Tudor Great Hall. And if anyone's interested in becoming a restorer wreck victim or addict, I'd strongly suggest looking at ecclesiastical properties because it's a real niche. And you can, as you say, you can get some wonderful bargains, frankly, and then you can go to Philip's gallery and populate them with wonderful paintings.
Thank you. We've definitely got some questions about that. I just want, before we move on to questions, you gave us some wonderful images, both of you. Philip, were there any more that you wanted to share with us so that we could have a...
Okay, there probably are, but my screen has
oh yes, of course,
has gone, looks like a sort of late Caravaggio now. I can barely see
anything.
But I do though want to direct you towards a photograph I took about 3 or 4 weeks ago with the sun coming through the windows. And this is an interior of Duck End. It's a large photograph of the sitting room. Lots of pictures on the wall. You can see modern British and old. You can see the old farmhouse, the old fireplace.
Yeah, we have it. It's up. Yeah.
Okay. So I just wanted to say that when I first arrived at Duck End, I was a little bit sort of rigid, unimaginative and purist, and so was my wife. And we only wanted, because we felt we'd got this sort of early artifact, 16th and 17th century things. But what has happened is, as the relationship has become more mature with the house, as we sort of trust each other more, of course, what really works, and one of the characteristics of these houses that's so moving and lyrical, is how the generations have added. And what we have found is that putting in the odd modern British picture, you can see this painting, I think, on the right by Jan Buchanan, which is of 1930s, and mixing them with some Tudor pictures, you get this sort of lyrical sense of continuity. And it's more fun. And you don't have to be quite so sort of rigid. So I think one of the delights of having an ancient house is finding the right paint colors, getting the lighting right, and just slightly moving and living with it. And that has been something that I think has taken 15 or 20 years for us to be bold enough to do, because I was slightly square before. Probably still am.
Never. And William, are there any pictures that you wanted us to have a look at?
I should say that we did have an enormous stroke of luck. These are some photographs from the book, but as I describe in the book, when just shortly after I sort of began the renovation, my father had been in touch with the last descendants of the Cressett family. And actually, Philip will know who I mean by Rufus Bird, who is an eminent figure in the world of antiques. And he is actually a direct descendant of the Cressetts, no less. His aunt, I think it is actually was a Thursby Pelham Cressett. And they're most wonderful family. And they decided about 10 years ago that they were going to put up at Christie's the remaining bits and bobs that were left from the Cressett estate, which used to be in a big house in I think it was in Cadogan Gardens. And so we couldn't believe our luck. We got this sort of message from the last descendants of the Cressetts. And the message was something along the lines of, we're putting the Cressett family furniture and collections up at Sotheby's. Would you like to come and have a look before we consign it to sale? Well, you can imagine, it was just a sort of dream come true. And I said to my father, I think, it's a bit like kind of saying, we felt like it was Tutankhamun. Anyway, we did end up acquiring some paintings. And in fact, in that original, if you go back to the dining room painting, the dining room shop, there we are. That's Francis Cressett. Right. And I have to say, I think he does do some tours at Upton, at Duck End. But we do a lot of tours, and we also do holiday lets, and the Gatehouse and all that is all available, by the way, if anyone wants to come for a wonderful staycation as soon as the opportunity arises. but and that bedroom as well below is very, very, very popular. But going back to Francis Cressett with the wig, he was actually present. I believe he was the treasurer to Charles I, was the head groom of his bedchamber. And my father discovered the most extraordinary thing the other day, that the ring he is wearing, he believes was given to him personally by Charles II, because he was also at Charles II's court before the Restoration. So, and what I love is standing in front of these paintings when I give the tours, and it's just so how wonderful, how great English portraiture is as a way of being a window into the times. And so, we are actually, because of COVID, having to switch to audio-visual tours, but we still will do and I'm sure if LAPADA want to do a kind of a group visit like the Royal Academy did, we're happy to do a tour. But if it wasn't for the paintings and Prince and Rupert, they wouldn't be nearly so interesting.
I doubt that. You're very good raconteurs. I'm just going to turn, because I think we actually have quite a lot of questions coming in that is not in the Q&As but was in the chat, which tickled me, was, are your ghosts friendly to both of you? But then I will, do you have ghosts in either venue?
Well, when we arrived, we thought we'd heard the ghost of an aeroplane, because during the Second World War, this was the highest point around Enfield, sort of landing strip was quite close, and a couple of bombers crashed. And the first night we were there, here at the house, I should say, we felt the whole house vibrating as if some bomber had sadly sort of spluttered out and landed in the fields around. We've never heard it since, but subsequently have found out a lot more about the activity of aircraft in the area during the Second World War. So call that a ghost if you want.
And so I think you've answered one of these questions already, actually, by showing us how you've sort of started incorporating contemporary art, because we had a question from someone who has a 17th century former workers' cottage that they furnished with antiques, but they want to incorporate some contemporary art. So perhaps we can give some tips on that. But one, I think, that is to you, Philip, but actually I think both of you would be able to help in answering this, is how do you light paintings in an old house when you've got small windows and limited natural daylight? So how do you make it feel, see the picture in its full glory, but also make it consistent with the house?
It's a really good question, and I think particularly with a low-slung ancient house that's in a good state of preservation, it is a challenge. But there are answers. One of the answers is sunken lights in the ceiling. I know that that's a sort of rather conventional and sometimes rather crude response, but my goodness me, you can get ones that are almost invisible these days. And for a good picture to be well lit, particularly in one of those dark rooms, those rooms are dark. It's not sweetness and light 20th century architecture. You're living in a sort of glorified cave, which is one of the reasons, if you live in a Tudor house or early house, one of the reasons I showed you that photograph was because the sunlight was coming in on this, that lovely yellow sort of Christmas light. And I wanted to show you what it was like. The other thing is, light a few, don't try and light everything. Otherwise you look like a damn picture gallery. So have some low lights, have some possibly a few up lights. Light a few well, but don't feel, even if you've got lots of great pictures, don't feel you have to light every one. It's rather, lighting is a bit like punctuation. You don't want too many semicolons. You've just got to allow some of the things just to work, some of them to back off into the half light. And those who are interested will come and have a look at them. And and don't forget, if you've got every single picture on your wall, bearing down upon you with sort of extrovert glistening brilliance, it's a very tiring look.
Yeah. And William, have you had to sort of think about how to display, having managed to get some of the treasures back to Upton Cressett? Have you had challenges displaying them? Oh, got frozen.
I mean, not really. I mean, frankly, my situation is rather different from Philip, where Philip probably has used the house in a way as a way of, if he's got paintings that need to be displayed, I should think, there's no he's got no shortage of supply.
I've got a lot of art. You're right.
I've got the exact opposite problem to Philip, which is that essentially my budget only. So my budget, and I have to say that Philip was very generous. He'll remember that basically, as I say in the book, the house was done in various phases, which basically meant a phase was like running out of money, basically. So there was one period where I think it probably did combine with Prince Rupert, and I have to say Philip was very good. I think that the bill didn't come in for about a year, which was very, very generous. But anyway, the point being is that I specifically only have bought paintings that have direct historic relevance to the house. Yeah. Because, so for example, the Francis Cressett, the Prince Rupert, and I've always coveted the idea of an Edward V. I think they're called corridor portraits. Is that right, Philip?
That's correct, yeah.
I think you've got an Edward V at Duck End, don't you? But anyway, the point is that it's certainly nice. You sold it, did you?
Well, I think
Anyway, but no,
I've got one.
But anyway, no. So I didn't have. No, I'm just saying that no. I mean, I totally agree with Philip about the lighting, but it's not a problem that I have had to say I've had to sort of brood over too much, because just if we get a painting, it's a miracle. Yeah.
We've got a few more minutes left, so there's one more question here which I think we sort of touched on, but it's from Melanie Lewis. And do you think we do enough in this country to cultivate and nurture traditional craftsmanship? What does the future hold for our heritage houses that rely so heavily on specialist skills to preserve them? Either of you can start that. Whoever's.
I think William's got probably more experience of that, haven't you, William?
Well, I know Melanie. Thank you for the question, Melanie. Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the artisans. Sorry, what was that? Sorry, I'm really sorry. What was the question again?
So the question is do we do enough in the UK really to cultivate and nurture traditional craftsmanship?
Traditional craftsmanship, yeah. I think the answer to that question is that traditional craftsmanship is something that, you know, the National Trust and English Heritage, actually, I have to say, have been, and thanks to the Cultural Recovery Fund and all the other organizations, I don't think the industry would survive were it not for the fact that these houses, you know, we lead the world in actually having some of the great artisans. And these great professions, whether it's stonemasonry or blacksmiths or whatever, the reality is that I think England is the world leader. And all I can say is, you know, as I said earlier, we just thoroughly enjoy employing the best artisans. And thank goodness that we've got this, you know, incredible industry. And I think, in all fairness, the government have actually been very good. I mean, the Cultural Recovery Fund, you know, is of quite staggering size, and I really hope it's being distributed in a way that will keep all these arts and trades going. I'm sure, you know, Philip can talk about the art world, you know, restorers and conservationists and what have you. I mean, I don't know how they've been doing under lockdown, but I imagine that they've been supported by the government in some way. At least I hope so.
Yes, I mean, I think a lot of art restorers have actually had quite a good time. They've rather enjoyed sort of the fact that annoying art dealers aren't hovering over them saying, where is it? And they've been able to actually do some extremely good work in lockdown. But that, of course, is a different area. It's not really house and home, which of course is what we've been talking about today.
Just one final question that I've just seen in the chat, which I realised we didn't ask, Philip, is why is your house called Duck End? Do you know? Is it?
Oh, yes. Well, thank you for asking. So Duck End, if you look up the word duck, it has a number of applications, including the ducking stool, which was that hideous way of testing whether someone was a witch. But a duck end basically means the watery end of a village, and every village, particularly ones in the country with a lot of farming around it, like here in the Cotswolds, required places to wash the sheep. And we have the earthworks around us of a sheep washing area, not quite the same as sheep dipping, but prior to taking your sheep to market, you would wash their fleece a few weeks before you took them to market, because you would bruise them slightly in the process. So this is what happened here. And I think many farmers would have driven, if that's the past participle of drove, driven their sheep down here anyway, and had it done that way. And also, the reason this is a manor house, and in fact I should have mentioned this, because we also established, we go back to about 1090, when we were the manor of William, William being a knight. I mean, that was an astonishing revelation, you know, to bring a house back that early, or certainly the plot of land. But one of the reasons that this house was built here, like so many manor houses, and Upton Cressett will be the same, because that you know, that's, even though we're a starter manor house, you know, they're a manor house too, is water, the access and proximity to water. And then later on with pipe water, I gather a lot of houses were built away from in the 18th century onwards. But one of the things that William and I have in common is what we feel in our waters.
I love that. Well, with that, I'm going to say thank you so much, because we're sort of running out of time now. But thank you to everyone who's joined us. You will see there is a lot of communication in the chat, but there are also links both to Art in Isolation, to Up to Cressett Hall, to William Cash and to his book. So you'll be able to find all of the resources and to learn more. I'm sorry that we didn't have time to ask more questions. This is a very sort of content-rich conversation, and both of you have so much more to say. And we haven't even really scratched the surface of the gardens either, apart from talking about the wildflowers and meadows. So thank you so much, William. Thank you so much, Philip. Thank you also to Cultural Communications, who worked with us to put this together. We will meet again on the 25th of March to talk about British designers, craftsmen and tastemakers. So something that we've sort of started the conversation with today. So many thanks to all of you, and goodbye.